Welcome to the JLC podcast, presented by the Jorgensen Learning Center. Change the conversation, change the results. Here's Dr. Ray Jorgensen.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. This is the JLC chat room. It is our In Learning series. And today we're going to have a chat with Terry Moulton, and my good friend for years and years and years, who probably has helped deepen my understanding of the practices, Joe Marshall. And both gentlemen are dutiful practitioners of conversational leadership. And this particular section, we're going to focus on what it means for somebody in an activity that has a board of directors and how a board of directors can function effectively and what we can do with it. So with that said, I'm going to kind of set the stage through one of our practices. Is why, what are we going to understand, what will each person do at the end of this chat room, by asking each gentleman why it matters. So Terry, I'll start with you. Why does it matter that we talk about the board of directors in a command? And why is that board of directors so important to the commanding officer?
So the board of directors really are the advisors to the commanding officers and are part of that team that really aligns the organization with the corporate headquarters. And so things that go on throughout that command really are centerpiece at the board of directors level. So it's important that they're all in sync and alignment as they go forward.
That's really good. Aligned action is what you're always after as a commanding officer, would be my suspicion. And sometimes we assume we have it when we might not. So that's really good. Joe, why is it so important to build this relationship between the commanding officer and the board of directors?
Well, I think it's important for many reasons, not the least of which is that the people sitting around the table are the folks who have to go out and execute. Or if they don't actually do the execution, they certainly influence the people who do the execution. I think in many organizations, when we say who actually in this organization, writes the contracts or spends the money or sees the patients, that's not always the management structure. Many times is not the management structure.
Yeah.
And so leadership is intending to drive the organization. That always has to be done through others. So having these effective relationships is hugely important.
That's really, really good. Thank you. In fact, you probably have already drifted us a little bit into purpose. So if there was just one thing you would like everyone that's listening to understand, what would that be, Joe? Just one thing. If you could just understand this, I think your life as a CEO would be better.
Well, as it regards the subject at hand here, Ray, board meetings, it's that when you come to the board meeting, it's that you're about the larger organization's purposes and status and success. Frequently, I believe, as junior officers or as junior members of an organization or participants, the goal is to go to the meeting and get no taskers. Or the goal is to not get called on or not have to speak up. The truth is that that sort of thinking, that sort of behavior really has to be left in the hallway in order for the organization to succeed. Because the purpose of the board is to have a larger time to reflect upon the successes and the failures. What's working, what's not working, and what are we going to do now to make it different?
Yeah, the ability to mitigate against that which is falling short of expectation. And a lot of times we tend to worry only about what we're doing, not the evidence of what we're doing. So that's really a big deal in this conversation. We'll get there. So Terry, if you had your way, what's one thing that you would like all of these commanding officers that are listening or XOs that are listening to understand?
Yeah, I think along with what Joe is saying, you're moving now from a department head to a director, and you're now becoming a board member. And you now have to realize that you have a bigger role in the organization. You're no longer protecting your turf in your department, but you're really trying to help the commanding officer move the command forward, and it's a bigger role. And you're not just in your lane, you're in the organization's lane. And your job is to ensure alignment of the organization from the CO down with a bigger headquarters. We're not these individual commands anymore. We're part of a system. And so as a board of directors, you have a bigger role in making sure you're in alignment with that system.
Love it. Love it, love it, love it. And as the persons that are listening to this little video, right, or podcast, or they choose to listen to it, as they listen to it, what is one thing that you would like each person to know and be able to do? Now it turns into action. So what's one thing? Then it would be really good if this person listening would be able to do blank. What would that one thing be? Terry, why don't you start that out?
Well, I think the one thing that a member of a board needs to do is to understand that they're now have that bigger role. And then how are they going to organize their role to make sure that they're executing things that are coming out of the board.
Nice. Thank you very much. Joe, what would you say about that? What's one thing you'd want somebody on a board to know and be able to do?
Well, it comes back to some of our core competencies and organizational effectiveness, but I believe a key one here, Ray, would be listening to understand. To understand that when we are human beings and we have thoughts, those thoughts then have to get coded up into language. That is always an imprecise process. People choose the wrong words. And so as human beings, really on some scale, as you think about it, we're pretty imprecise communicators. And so that creates a need to truly, when someone is speaking on an issue or a concern or a readiness matter, that you truly listen to understand what are they trying to communicate here and be inquisitive about that and ask good questions so that you really capture the essence of what they're thinking about.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say is the practice of the disciplines that you share with people and that, Terry, you share with people in practice can enable some of that common understanding, which then would lead to an aligned action. So I'm getting that from you. I'm getting that from you strongly. So this setup was all about why are we talking about this? What do we hope people will understand? And what would we expect each of the people listening to do moving forward? So let me kind of switch into the different roles. What is the XO's responsibility at a board meeting? Yeah,
so I think there's different ways that the commanding officer can execute his board responsibilities. As I grew up in Native medicine, the role of the XO was to execute the board. Right, the CO is the keeper of the vision. Where's the organization going? And then the XO's job is to execute that. So he needs to figure out how he or she he's going to organize the board. What's the frequency of the meetings? What time of day are those meetings going to be? What is the membership? Do they have the right membership for the board? Is there the right representation, or does there need to be representation from other members other than directors on the board? So I think that's the role of the XO.
Nice, thank you. Joe, can you add on to that?
So yes, so I appreciate I will describe it as sort of a logistics function that Terry described there, so that the XO is kind of runs a larger agenda of what is the board talking about. Is the board talking about the things that are pertinent and germane now for this command in supporting operational units? And are we getting ready for Joint Commission and all of those other things that have to be done at the board? I think it's also important for the XO, amongst the many players in the room, to also be the one who's kind of being an umpire in the meeting. So how well are we communicating here? Are we talking about the hard issues, or are we deflecting and avoiding? Because again, we're all human beings, and there are subjects that we love to deflect and avoid. And I think that's where the XO has to be perhaps a little heartless, perhaps an unflinching focus on, look, we know we have readiness issues, and we're not getting at the essence of the discussion. What is keeping us from getting more ready, or what is keeping us from seeing patients, or what is keeping us from meeting our commitments. And that as he hears the conversation kind of perhaps dancing around those points, even with all the best of intentions, if they're not getting to the essence, to say, let's bring it back to the center.
I love that idea of essence of the conversation. Terry, how would you add on to that piece?
Yeah, I like that. It really, you're the watchdog, the observer. Are you getting active participation by the members of the board? Because they all need to contribute to where we are, because we want alignment. When we leave the meeting, we want alignment with whatever the key factors that we're going to go execute.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So I think you very nicely described the XO function at a board meeting. And Terry, you opened the door up to the CO is the keeper of the vision. So let's talk a little bit about the most effective COs that you've seen. Tell me a little bit about their operating principles. How did they see the board? How did they use the board? The most effective COs, how did they use the board?
Yeah, I think the most effective CO has to determine which way he's going to go. Is it a strategic focus for the board, or is it a management function of the board, or do you add a little bit of both in there so that you encompass the whole gambit of the organization? And then you have to really organize it so that you're covering the bases. I think an effective CO would then maybe look back and say, over the last quarter, what did we talk about? And you score it. And if we talked about quality, how many times did we talk about quality? Did we talk about readiness? How many times did we talk about readiness? And then identify those gaps, right? What was missing? What do we want to make sure that we're talking about over the next quarter as we look forward? Someone who really put some time in to thinking about their board and how they're going to organize it, what the membership is, and what are the elements that they're going to bring into that board meeting. Because it's not just a meeting. It's really, it's the core function of the organization, so that we're making sure that we're executing what we need to be executing.
Really nice. I'm going to ask Joe what he heard you say and ask him to expand. And many of the private sector folks we work with, they just keep having, when they get a new leader, that leader says, well, when did you guys used to meet? Well, we met on Thursdays. And for how long did you meet? Then they continue to meet on Thursdays for exactly the amount of time that they had before. No longer conversation in many cases. Not often will they talk about really what's the intent of that meeting. If it's really serving us well, where are we going? So that was really good, Terry. Thank you. Joe, what did you hear Terry saying? What are you thinking right now?
Well, and that's what I think Terry talked about, an essential part of the board, which is that it has many roles, many hats, okay? And so I think, again, strategic focus, management focus, performance focus, again, those are all different divinities. And so the ability to work effectively in each of those divinities is important. And I think to some degree, again, it comes back to some of the fundamental things that we talk about, that when you have these meetings, in order to ensure that the members are with you, are together in focusing on the purpose, it's the context, the purpose, and the outcomes need to be clear and need to be clearly stated by the meeting leader. Otherwise, you have someone who's in a management meeting and they think they're in a strategic meeting. So again, I think management has a real role here at a meeting. And sometimes there's awkwardness around this, Ray, or sometimes I see that people are hesitant to say exactly what an outcome is going to be. But I think it is a spectacularly important thing for the leader when they sit down and get the group focused in the room to say, the reason we're here today is this. And when we leave here, we'll be aligned in perspective, or we'll have a better understanding of what we do about training or about readiness or about patient care. And that we have committed actions that follow after that conversation.
Yeah, committed actions do something to the human being sitting in the board meeting. If they hear from the CO that at the end of this particular agenda item, there's an expectation for you individually, something for you to do. Something shifts inside of us all. It makes us think, oh my God, this is more important than I thought. Or I really can't do my email right now. I need to really listen to this because something just occurred.
Well, and I would just say, I would just add, Ray, that many times people think that organizations, that the purpose will be obvious, or the purpose, it certainly has to be clear to everybody else in the room. I must be the only one who is in doubt. And I have to tell you, I've participated in some meetings at a pretty high level where when it was over, we were calling each other trying to figure out what was that about, because nobody ever said, and we were left to kind of infer, and nobody was sure at the end.
I see that myself, not just in military leadership, but many leadership structures. And the distinction isn't really hard. It's a few things. This is why we're here. It's what I hope you're going to understand. And this is the expectation for action. That's really good, Joe. Terry, anything else on this particular piece?
I just think the board is so important, and our new COs and XOs, they come into it. It's a new world for them, but I think they have to give this some time to think about how they're going to execute their board. What do they want to accomplish during their tenure? And the board is that tool for them to execute over their time. So they really have to think about it. And it's not just a meeting. Just like you said, you don't come back in, well, the meeting was on Thursday, so we'll just have it on Thursdays. No, what do you want to accomplish out of that meeting? And is there a better time, right? We often have meetings at 10 o'clock in the morning. Well, that's clinical time. Why not have the meeting at 1600 or started at 1600? So that's, your board is done for the day. You can have focus. So basically the CO really needs to be thinking about how he is going to execute his board over his tenure.
Nice, nice. Are there any other thoughts that the two of you have about letting somebody who's going to step into the XO-CO role, letting them know what they need to be thinking about? Are there any heads up that you would give them, things to watch out for? Joe?
So I would, just kind of following on to Terry's point there of a moment ago, I think there is not a broad enough understanding or reflection, if I could say it that way, on the point that a meeting is a very expensive process. Again, if you as the CO or the XO had to stroke a check to pay everyone's salary and bonus for the hour that they spend sitting at the table, not working on readiness, not seeing patients, I think that would give you pause to think about the best possible use of that time. So I think that goes to the need to ensure that it is a good use of time and that the folks who are in the meeting actually need to be there. And to put a little finer point on it, because I think there's a tendency many times to have meetings that are focused on information, that are focused on information distribution. And as many of the folks I coach and have heard me say, I've taken to calling those Lamborghini meetings because it is the most expensive meeting you can possibly have to sit around and just talk without a real aim or without a real outcome. And I'm not saying that there's not a time perhaps to do that. And I would leave that to the discretion of the commander. But I think it's important for the commander to understand this is expensive. If I choose to have a meeting, I want to make it a good use of time, and I want to get outcomes out of it, not just generalized information with no way forward.
I love the idea of Lamborghini meeting. That's really pretty cool. Thank you. Terry, add on to that?
No, he's absolutely right. So I think the commander needs to have a plan, needs to spend some time to think about the plan. What are the elements he wants to bring to the board? Organize it ahead of time, and then execute that during his tenure.
That's great. This was wonderful, men. One last thing. So if you were talking to your best friend who's going to be an XO or a CO next year, what is one thing you would tell him, one piece of advice you would give that person to make sure that they were successful? What would be that one thing?
So I guess I'll go first. One as it relates to board members, that one thing is you need to spend some time thinking about how you want to do your board. Is it a strategic focus? Is it a management focus? Is it a little bit of both? And then how are you going to develop your members, your board members, as you have your 2-year tenure, because you're preparing them for their time as an XO and a CO. So how do you do both, right? How do you make sure the organization is going, and yet you bring along those proteges that you now have responsibility to develop? So that's what I would recommend.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. Joe, what's one thing you'd want your best friend to know as they walk into the XO/CO role?
I think accountability, Ray, is what I would say. I think, as Terry said, you need to think about the board as a training ground, but it is also a key element in how, in your management success, in your command success. And so for the board to understand that they have a real responsibility for what comes out of those meetings, and that you will hold them accountable to make the organization work as effectively as possible.
Love it. Promises, 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 and close the loop. Really good, really good. Thank you, men. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Terry Moulton and Joe Marshall talking to us about leadership, and very specialized leadership in Navy medicine, and interested in helping those that are listening get better at what it will be like for me to be a CO, XO, or a board member. This has been the In Learning series from JLC, and you've been in the JLC chat room with 2 phenomenal people and great leaders. So thank you very much for the time spent with us. Hope you got something out of it. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
The Jorgensen Learning Center provides leaders with a practical framework to use conversation as a discipline to create a high-performance environment where people are energized to share, contribute, and succeed together. To learn more, visit gojlc.com.